that if you are volunteering, you see the world differently. You are a senior government servant, civil servant. You went to Raffles institution. So I told him that every month you meet friends who are all RI. Then you go for holidays, also from RI. Don't you find it boring? All the friends are RI people. Why don't you meet other people? So I told him that when I was a volunteer at the Woodlands Home, which is the biggest home for the elderly in Singapore 20 years ago, I met an elderly Indian man. He told me, "Doctor, you are very young. People look up to you. Look, I'm very old now. But don't you know that many years ago, I was in the army, and I defended Singapore during the Second World War, and I saw the Japanese tanks rolling across the causeway." It's a very interesting story. Another Sanctuary women got a slash on the right left arm. The Sanctuary women are people who helped to build the HDB flats. And she told me the same thing. She was running, and the Japanese took out the samurai sword and slashed her right arm. I took on the stories of this wartime generation. I was giving a talk in the day center, and there was a retired doctor, 85, almost blind, and he told me that I cannot do anything now, but I love to listen to the BBC radio, a program called Letter from America. So I took all the stories and I wrote a novel called Listening to Letter from America. Now this story was shortlisted in London for the war. It's the only novel in Singapore used at Harvard University with a module on aging. I know the time is up to tell me that. I will give you one slide. If you want to buy the book, it's at the foyer there. The proceeds go to the Jurong Aging Study. I know that during question time, someone will definitely ask you a question. The question is, why do you start at 65? Why don't you start earlier? I agree, you started earlier. When earlier, some of you may recognize this, or these flowers, it's the daffodils. A famous poem we studied when we were in secondary school by a man called William Wordsworth. He has written beautiful poems. And one of the famous lines in this poem is, "The child is father of the man." That it should start very early in the child. In the time when, as what Professor John Wong mentioned, it should be at the time we inherit from our gene from our parents. Well, you realize in the research we've done at Jurong that parenting is very important. Those kids with very positive and very less authoritarian parents are more resilient and less depression in late life. I think this is something wonderful. This is definitely the last slide. This slide is entitled Undefeated. It's probably the most expensive painting in Singapore. I'm hoping that someone will want to acquire this painting for the National Gallery. It's a painting about resilience. And the oak tree, the banyan tree, stands up, strong and sturdy in the midst of an impending storm, a tempest. Some years ago, when I started psychiatry, I was told that I must be analyzed first by the psychoanalyst. And I told them it's too expensive. And they said, "Why don't you do a painting and you analyze the mind of a young Chinese doctor?" So they asked me, "What is this?" So I told them that it's not a house, it's a home, family. And this tree represents values. The values the family taught us. Values of compassion. Values of empathy. Values of integrity, respect. I think these are the values that hold us true. These are, I told them, the therapists, these are the stresses of life, and this is our life course. And the values are very important. What has this got to do with SG-100? If your memory serves you well, I told you that I mentioned to the professors at Cambridge that the success of Singapore rests on two factors of human mind: mental resilience and creativity. I think for SG-100, we need one more factor of the human heart, and that is compassion, as exemplified by voluntarism or philanthropy. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Kwa, for his most interesting presentation. Next, we're going to switch gear a little bit. And let me introduce the next speaker. Next speaker is Venerable Dr. Somaloka. And Venerable Dr. Somaloka is a meditation teacher, psychologist, and acupuncturist. Combining the three disciplines, he has helped and treated numerous people to better mental health and well-being. However, he believes that the goal of mindfulness practice should go beyond mundane level of fleeting happiness or curing of the psychosomatic diseases. It should extend to the original intent as taught by the Buddha, which is the ultimate purification of the mind. Venerable Dr. Somaloka, please.
Also like that, and to worship and breath. Remember the master and then Sangha, all the other friends. We started the symposium by singing, "Mind is everything." When I was listening to that, I was wondering, do we really believe it? Mind is everything, but unfortunately, there's a last thing we would be interested to study. This is where the Buddhist mindfulness comes into being. That's exactly what the Buddha discovered. Even though we do spend so much of our time and energy studying all those other things, hardly we spend our time studying who we are, what we are. And Buddha discovered that if you want to really study our own being, we have to start with our own mind. And how can we study anything unless we can pay attention? This is where the foundation of mindfulness, teaching us to learn how to pay attention to our own being. And as you know, and that's not very easy to do. Buddha himself even challenged some people, those who claim that they have tremendous happiness and they will be happy. And Buddha once said that if you can come and sit with me, just a couple of hours without moving, and without feeling any boredom, and just to be happy with yourself. He said, I would become your disciple. It's a very heavy statement, and we all know as opposed to mindfulness practice and meditation, it's not easy. And the fortunate thing is, of course, now mindfulness has come and has taken the attention of scientific community. And that's very encouraging. Not because that we do need the scientific backup to practice mindfulness, but having that type of validation would be good, encouraging, and will promote our interest in stuff. For that reason, I really respect, and that's the very reason actually I went to study clinical psychology. Not because I thought it was a keen understand the mind of helping people, but after going through that program, I realized it is a valid and very useful way of learning the mind and stuff. So I'm very fortunate in that sense. I am in the position that I come across people who really need help. They don't come to me just looking for a religious understanding. They're asking me just to see whether I can be able to help. I just want to share with you one very interesting case. Just recently, just before I came here, I encountered. this gentleman comes from a very wealthy family, and himself is a very well-known business entrepreneur. And ironically, most of his investment in the medical research. And unfortunate thing was he was encountered with a particular disease, almost incurable. And he was running around the world looking for medical or scientific treatment. Finally, he was sent to me. Then I asked him, what can I do? He said, I don't know. So I was sent to you. Because no doctors could help me. Then I asked him, if the doctors come and do, what can I do for you? And he was just sitting. I said, I don't think it's my way. I don't think I could do anything for you. But I'd like you to help you to see whether you can do something. And he said, he laughed at me. He said, what the hell is that? Even the old doctors can't do anything for me. What can I do for myself? I said, yeah, maybe, because together we should explore. And he was sitting, and I said, now you know very well that no doctors, no medicine can do. And just imagine, if you meet someone like yourself, being diagnosed by the system, what can you do for that person? He said, I don't think I can do anything. Be patient. See that. And, sorry. Anyway, we just went along this process, and I asked him to just visualize a little bit. Imagine that you encounter someone like yourself. What could you do? I said, don't try to advise him. Don't try to preach, or don't try to look him down either. Just see what can you do. And he taught and taught and taught. And he said, maybe I just sit with him. I said, why don't you do the same thing with yourself now? He said, no, I don't know how to do that. My mind keeps on running and running and running, and I'm desperate. I just need to find out there's something who can help me. And I don't think that by sitting and being with myself can be any use. I said, this is exactly what we're going to study here. You may not realize the power of being with yourself. So I guided through him, and finally, I saw his tears coming. I said, why are tears coming? He said, when I stopped to think my illnesses and everything, and I saw in my own being how sad it is, how desperate, how helpless it is. I said, that's exactly what the mindfulness is. It has the capacity to activate the compassion. And that compassion is very curative. And think about that. And yeah, what these organizers want me to talk about the current situation in mindfulness research, particularly from a practical point of view. And I find, to be honest, there's a clash between the theory and the practice. And as we know very well, the current research has shown more than enough to show the effectiveness of mindfulness. And as a doctor, there's so many skills to come, but that's enough to convince this particular technique of mindfulness is very effective. Now we have come to actually a crossroad. As some research shows very clearly, what is happening in the current practice, we have extracted or isolated the technique from the theory. And what they usually call secularization. And there's some sort of concern. Why is it that the scientists are not interested in exploring the other aspect of this mind practice, or perhaps some sort of metaphysical problem? In my personal view, I think that's what it is. You know, as you know very well, particularly like the psychotherapy, still operating on the, what we call the biomedical model. You know, Dr. Wallace is the good one to talk about this. In his work, I see he bring out the issue of that. And unfortunately, the biomedical model does not allow us to explore that what is not allowed, actually, amenable to objective experimentation. And fortunately, unfortunately, mindfulness practice goes beyond what is observable with objective methodologies. So science, and this we can trace back the history of science also. No? Even the point we start the founder of the psychotherapy, and he saw very clearly that current paradigm can't explain certain psychological issues, like subjective experiences. Yet he believes one day they will be able to explain, understand subject experiences with the help of modern science. In fact, one of his followers, Symposium, predicted that 21st century is going to be the era of the mind, he said. And the idea behind that is still saying, one day we will be able to explain subject experiences in terms of physiological processes. But unfortunately, that day hasn't come yet. And the reason is still we are caught up with this environmental. And in my own training, I could see that. I was trained and studied with that, and when it comes to practice, we come to that dead end. And medical doctors know very well that. Even though theory does not allow them to validate patient subjective experiences, in practice we heavily depend on how the patient has to say, you are born in theory. But if you ask, can the subject experiences validate with the scientific model we are working, of course we can. So this is where I think the current research need to focus on. How to expand the theoretical model. And as you know, the Buddhism, we put the Dhamma Vinaya. It's that this particular Vinaya means the practical side of mindfulness, things like that, based on a very sophisticated theory of reality. Unless we begin to understand that, then we will start with this so-called secularization. And as you know, the therapies are actually based on work on what's presenting. But the Buddhist idea of Buddha that embrace this so-called presenting problem is a wider concept. And that's where I think maybe this paradigm class going to come up. The way Buddhism view life is very different. Like Freud would say, the human being or psychological from what goes in the world is a very physiological. In his own word, he might say it's just nothing but the frustration of sexual energy. And the way I say in Buddhist view, this dukkha or the presenting problem are far more sophisticated. They are just tip of the iceberg. There are many more psychological problems that we all human beings handle. And that's a word called dukkha. It's a very all-embracing concept. And in that concept, Buddha said not only psychological problems, even physiological problems are manifestation or expression of this concept of a dukkha. And how to bring this concept, this psychological, theoretical model into practice is an issue like that. How are scientists going to do it? And one thing we need to do Sorry about it. So the question is, can we use like the Buddhist paradigm, like a particular view of human being, into experimentation? The one of the things Buddhism will tell you, the life, despite all this suffering, is a very sacred thing. In Buddhist biology called Dulvachaman Satta. To be born as a human being is a very rare thing. So you could look at psychological problem as just a little bit of symptom of frustration of not being able to really fully actualize human potential. So it's not the problem in themselves. In other words, we have to take the presenting problem as a stepping stone. And that's exactly what I found in my work. Even though people come to psychotherapy with some sort of presenting problem, if you keep on working through it, they end up with understanding and want to know what is life all about. That's very interesting if you can process them through. And then that all those aggregate things we never thought about life. As I said in the beginning, even though we say the life is very sacred, it's the last thing. We know very well in practice. The human life is the cheapest thing. We would appreciate our motor vehicle more than life if it becomes that situation. So Buddhism brings out this issue of the sacred of life. And I think that's one of the studies of the document minded, Esther Blackburn. One of the factors that affect the therapy is lack of self-respect, appreciation. And she found out one of the good aspects of mindful practice is it promotes this value of human life. And that is where the Buddhist therapy will start, respecting life. And that there is a theoretical model. Because the life from the Western point of view, of course, nothing but just biological organism. It came out of nowhere, and it goes nowhere. And we start there. Whereas the teaching like Buddhism would look at the life in a much more transcendental, sacred phenomenon appearing and continue to appear in many, many forms. So we need to have that appreciation of life. And this is where, as I said earlier, if you really want to appreciate the life, you need to learn to focus on the subject. And then when we come there, we find that it is a problem too. As Buddha says, sanya, our old mode of cognition, cannot do that. The old mode of perception is more constructive, it's engaging. It pushes us back to the world. It's winding principle. And its perception creative. It can't see things happening, but it has its own value. And that's the whole thing we say. We can see the magic of perception. But unfortunately, the perception has the ability to get in touch with us. It's a different mode of cognition. And that's exactly what the Buddha found. He says, Sanya Nidhanam Vipapasana. That most of these problems, whether it's a presenting problem or global, individual, it doesn't matter. All these problems are nothing but due to the way we see things. Until we try to change the way we see it, Buddha says no true freedom. And that we found out, fortunately, we do have this faculty of mindfulness. But that is a faculty that we need to awaken and develop. Even though it is all the human beings, we have the potential, but we need to awaken. And the sutta is called Sati Indriya. Fortunately, this is I recently read the latest edition of John Kabat-Zinn's work. He recognized the fact that mindfulness is not just paying attention. And I was very happy to hear that. He said that paying attention is a means to awaken mindfulness. And as you know, unfortunately, this is one of the problems when scientists are talking about operational definition, they start with that. understand that mindfulness, so if it is a result of paying attention, then how are you going to operationalize it? I don't know. So we have to be aware of that as well. The Buddha said, somehow, he said, by through paying attention, we can awaken, we can get the glimpse of what the mind can see. The mindfulness itself is, of course, very curative. Satinjikwa ambikwe sabbatikanadam is a properly developed mindfulness. Sorry, since I came to Singapore, I actually tried it. So the mind, we had to first distinguish the perception from the sati or the mindfulness. Begin. The perception, as Buddha said, is a more, we can experiment with that. At this particular moment, if we're sitting here, we can observe our six senses are in constant touch with external stimuli. Can we stop that process? As a biological organism, just imagine that. Can we stop the senses are constantly running after external things? And I will give you an example. If you just feel just a little bit of like that, straight away that our senses go and we create the story of that stimuli. No? You know what I'm saying? The senses are constantly reacting to the stimuli. And it is that construct when the senses come into contact with stimuli, we create what I call a story. It is that story that we take as object. But to see this process, to see the real object, we need to be able to observe this process beyond, above that. Normally we can't do that because as a biological organism, things are constantly going and reacting and creating stories of the stimuli. If that stimuli that creates a story, image that we take as object. And that is where the problem comes. So we never see things as they are. It's always a construct. And as you know, perception is conditioned by so many factors. So if you really want to see things as they are, if you want to, of course naturally, if you want to react to a situation as it is, we need to be able to see as it is. But our perception does not allow. So what the Buddhism would tell us, the mindfulness practice, try to, like in Vipassana practice, we try to observe this very process itself. If you can observe how the senses and the stimulus are interacting in that process, it says that we slowly we create space between the mind process and the external object. For the first time, we see that instead of taking the created object, that's conditioned object as an object, we see this is a construct of this perceptual process and the stimulus. And we see that it creates space between the mind and the external stimulus. And there, that is where we begin to understand how the mind is projecting its own stuff to the external object. And that way, it doesn't mean to deny the personal object either. At least get a better clarity of that. And this is extremely important.